So, thank you for staying. It's really hard to do a closing keynote when everyone just wants to go home. I'm guessing there's a party after this. Is there a party after this or not? You're not invited. Bloody useless, isn't it? So I thought maybe people are staying for the beer afterwards, but okay, well then I'm really, really flattered. Thank you very much. And on top of that, it's in English. Okay, great. So let's start. Who's here to learn? Right. Given this is the last talk of the conference, you can leave. If you're here to learn, you can leave now because you're not going to learn anything new today. Well, at least not with this talk. So, before I start, a couple of presentations 101. 101 basically means things that you pick up. Like, it's the entry-level things. And when you're giving presentations, you have to follow these kind of guidelines. Informative. It's got to be informative. You've got to tell people about things. You know, you make sure they learn something new. It's got to be thought-provoking in the sense that it's not so much what you say, but the questions people ask after you say it. It has to be entertaining because people really get bored very, very easily. Inspirational, because if you inspire people, they will do great things. And it should have no foul language. So given that, this talk is going to be the complete opposite of all of this. Okay? So don't then complain to me that it was crap. I usually also don't talk about myself, but it needs context. This was me. I was 2 years old. Microsoft guessed it right. One day my mother said, we're moving to Spain. I got scared. I got into computers and became very, very grumpy, which is me now. Okay? A little bit of background to this talk as why I'm giving this talk. So a couple of years ago, I think it was last year, a friend of mine called Greg says, Hadi, I'm doing a conference in Lithuania. You should come. And I've never been to Lithuania, and I said, this is a really, really good opportunity to go to Lithuania, and I'll go. And the conference is called Build Stuff, really great. But he said, but. And there's always a bloody but, isn't there? By the way, I apologize for my foul language. You have to give a talk on WCF, right? And that's kind of, you know, like getting a wedding invitation that you've been so longing to make sure you're on that list. You know, you are one of the people that have been invited, opening it up and seeing something like this instead of the address. Now, you'll say, me, WCF, why? What have I got to do with WCF? I mean, what did I do wrong in my life to be punished to talk about WCF? I wrote a book on WCF. And if that wasn't bad enough, I wrote it in Spanish. And in Spain, we're very cultured. We love to read books. We just don't know you can pay for them. So normally people don't make money from books anyway. I made even less. And unfortunately, this still exists. If you Google WCF Hadi, I'm the first hit, which kind of sucks. I'm trying to file a request with Google to try and forget me, but it's not going very well. But getting back to WCF, first there was Corba. How many of you are old enough here to remember Corba and having worked with Corba? It was fantastic technology, I kid. And Corba was this amazing thing that came out, and at the same time, I used to be a guy that used to work on Delphi. The only screenshot I found of Midas was, ironically, in Russian. And Midas, Delphi people, Delphi, anyone? Right, oh, brilliant. You remember Midas, no? Midas was this amazing distributed technology that you paid $5,000 for a license. And if you were stupid enough like me, you bought it 2 weeks before they made it free. And it would allow you to make this distributed application. And it was fantastic. Borland, Go, I love Borland. And Microsoft contributed with things as well. They took COM and they said, remember how we screwed you? Yes, now we're going to distributely screw you. And they brought us DCOM. And then one great day, one amazing thing happened, and it was called this, the Great Unification. So how many of you actually know WCF? Right. So WCF was fantastic. It was a programming model, it was a service model, and it was a channel, right? And it was absolutely brilliant. And what it did was it basically unified all your model for communication needs. It didn't matter what you were doing, whether you were doing HTTP, socket, whatever. It was just fantastic. It would unify all of those things. And it complied with the 4 pillars of SOA, which is service-oriented architecture. Now, ironically, these 4 pillars, well, coincidentally, these 4 pillars were by Don Box, who at the same time happened to work at Microsoft, who was the same company that was behind WCF. It didn't agree with Thomas Earle's 11 pillars, but we'll just pretend that that didn't matter. And they said, this is the silver bullet. They did. All of you that had issues, all of us that had issues, they said, this is the silver bullet for your communication needs. So it was really easy. It was ABC. You had the address, which is where you want to talk to. Binding is how you want to talk to. And contract, who you want to talk to, how you want to talk to them. And you would just, you know, set this up, and it was fantastic. The best part of it was that you would configure it at runtime, right? And runtime configuration was XML, which is great. This is a kind of like a guide to configuring WCF. Didn't fit on 1 screen, didn't fit on 2 screens, didn't fit on 3 screens, just to give you a bit of perspective. That's what it looked like. And if you build it with WCF, it will run, of course, if you could manage to configure it. And every Microsoft evangelist and every conference speaker and every book author would say to you, this is awesome. It's awesome. And when someone said, no, you said it's awesome. But things started to fail. Things started to go really bad, and someone said, well, your issue is WCF. WCF sucks. It's kind of bad. And you're like, but, you know, promises that were meant to be delivered weren't delivered. And you're like, I just rewrote this. You just came here and said to me, use WCF. I did. And look what happened. And then someone had the bright idea of saying every class should be a service. Anyway, and it just went all downhill from there. But they said it was a silver bullet, and as you all know, the rest is history. But the great thing about this is that if one of the reasons that has held you back from using WCF is that it wasn't open source, now it is. So if you want to use WCF, now you can. It is open source. They just made it open source. But the best part about this is that this isn't unique to us, to Microsoft. Java has this too, right? You know what they say, you know, you have a problem and you use Java, now you have a problem factory. And really, it is. Seriously, I'm not joking. I'm doing a lot of Java now, and really, they just love their factories. This year, I think it was, I was in Devox in a conference in France, and we were on they organized like the speaker dinner, and we were going on this boat across the river, and we're going under the Eiffel Tower, and I'm standing there taking this picture. And Antonio Conclave is one of the organizers of the conference. He's like, you look like tourists. I'm like, well, technically we are, but okay. Take this picture, and he starts to tell me about the Eiffel Tower, and he's like, never in the history. Now, Antonio, if you don't know him, he's really big in Java, and he does a lot of J2EE. And he's like, this is nothing in this world is so pointless and meaningless and so ugly as the Eiffel Tower. And I said, technically not correct, because there's also Java 2EE, right? And Java 2EE is great. It brings us many things, like if you've ever done FizzBuzz, there's FizzBuzz Enterprise Edition on GitHub, where you can, you know, it even builds on Travis CI. And then one day someone said, let's build a better enterprise. It was Spring. And Spring brought us amazing things, like abstract singleton proxy factory bean, which the help file, and I'm not making this up, says convenient proxy factory bean superclass for proxy factory beans that create only singletons. And I promise you that I'm not joking. This is literally what the help file says. I couldn't make this up. But there is hope. There's hope out there, and I'm guessing that you all know what the hope for distributed systems are, right? Somebody tell me. Microservices, right? If you don't know what microservices, it's a lot of little things, doing little things, talking to each other, and magically everything works. It's like doing a lot of little SOAs. Except in this case, you fail small, fail often, and fail a lot. Or as I like to say, you move from a single ball of mud to orchestrating a lot of shit. And as my friend Simon Brown says, he's like, you know, I'll keep saying this, if people can't build that monolith properly, they're not going to be able to build little microservices properly. But this is good. And of course, microservices is SOA, but you don't say SOA because today you cannot do any kind of consulting. You imagine you go to someone and they say, can you do something for me? Yeah, we're going to do SOA. No, can you do this other thing called microservices? Yes. Just pretend it's not the same thing. But it's good because this allows us to have conversations like how many lines is a microservice? Right. Now, how small should a microservice be? Fortunately for us, and you know, like many things, tools can help. In fact, I've been working on a prototype for a plugin which allows you to select a bunch of code and extract a microservice. We're always there kind of making sure that providing you at JetBrains with the best tooling. And microservices is now mainstream because if you go to microservices.org, it now redirects to IBM. So they've caught wind of this. They also apparently recently bought the Weather Channel, and I guess they misunderstood the cloud. And that's going to be the silver bullet, right? That's going to be the next best thing. And in 5-6 years, someone will come along and say, yeah, you know, all of that, orchestrating that stuff, yeah, that wasn't working. But again, this is not unique to microservices, and this is not unique to distributed applications. We have this issue with data persistence, on trying to solve the problem of data persistence. In the early days, we all wrote our DAOs, right? How many of you here have written a DAO? And someone came along and said, ORMs are so much better. ORMs are fantastic. They really solve all of that rubbish work that you have to do over and over again. So what did we do? We wrote our own ORM. Instead of using the ones we had, we wrote our own. Microsoft took nhibernate and they cloned it to Entity Framework. And you say, well, maybe we should have just used nhibernate. Maybe we should have just stuck to what there was. And of course we did. And then what we did was create abstractions around this so that we lost all the power of the ORM and we didn't gain any value because everybody changes their ORMs every 5 days. How many of you have changed ORMs in a single project? Yeah, there you go. And then at some point someone came and said ORMs are bad. And they said you should separate your writes from your reads, or otherwise known as, yes, or originally when you used to Google CQRS, Google would respond and say, did you mean cars? Seriously, it used to happen. And it was called CQRS. And you all know that if you do CQRS, whether or not it's needed, whether or not it's actually required, you have to do event sourcing. Because nowadays, if you don't do event sources, you're not doing anything. And if you're doing event sources in CQRS, heaven forbid if you're not doing domain-driven design. Right? Sorry, Dino. And that's going to solve our problems. But then you realize that it wasn't the actual DAO. It wasn't the DAO that was causing the issue. There was a problem. It was the underlying infrastructure for persistent, which was called the SQL server. And that was the issue. And then someone came along and said, no SQL. No SQL is the way to go. Because all of this entity relationship model is just, that's the cause of the problem. It's all bad, and they told us to store things in different ways. So they say, you know, if you want to store things as document, use Couch. If you want to do column lookup, use Cassandra, Hadoop, or there were alternatives to not storing things. You had your choice, basically. And they said that's the silver bullet. And of course, we all know that that's not true. There are a bunch of people that say it's the platform, right? And the community sucks too. So recently, a few years ago, it was .NET sucks. Going to Node.js, right? Good thing is that it's not unique to us. JVM also sucks. They also go to Node.js. Bad thing for Node is that it also sucks now. Everyone's doing Go. And then you get posts like this. Google Go, that's what's going to rip Java out of the enterprise. Of course, like 2 years ago, it was Node, that's what it's going to rip Java out of the enterprise. And normally when they leave these technologies, whether it's .NET or Java, they write a blog post, right? And in this blog post, they write a whole bunch of things, but there are a few words that kind of stand out because too much ceremony, because scale, enterprise, and you don't help each other, right? .NET developers, by the way, you're the worst community in the world, just so you know. Now, you say, you get articles. Having moved to Node.js, our productivity has increased tenfold. by some tech lead somewhere that's never measured it. We now ship microservices using Docker, aligning our technology stack with our business needs. All this is made possible with Go. Some CTO somewhere. And you're like, well, actually, maybe it was just our code that was the problem, not the platform. Maybe it's just us, because our code technically even changed every time we rewrote that damn thing. Silver bullet, not delivered. And talking about not delivering and about quality, we've all gone through this stage, right? Very early on in our life, we said, write code, ship it. Someone said, test it. You're like, test it? Oh, this testing thing is unit testing thing is cool. We should unit test all things. And then we said, no, unit testing all things isn't enough. Now you need integration tests. And you need to permute all the possible combinations, create integration test. You realize some point has gone too far, and you're like, oh, screw it. And now we just ship code, right? How many of you have done this curve? Yep. Gone from not testing anything to testing everything to, oh, screw this. Just want to get paid. And of course, if you're doing unit testing well or not, it doesn't matter, because if you're not doing TDD, it's pointless, right? I've even said this. And test-driven development is, you know, write something that fails, write something that passes, refactor, even if you don't need to, write something that's red, and just end up in this loop. If you're not familiar with test-driven development, and you don't like it, and you realize that it was pointless, there was behavior-driven development that came out by Dan North, great guy, and he said it's about communication. So what did we do? We created frameworks, such as Cucumber. And then we did user stories. As a developer, I want to write a framework so I don't have to speak to people. I'll take this BDD framework and I'll give it to the business people, and they can write the damn thing. And I'll just write my code. And Dan's like, but it's about speaking. Oh, no, this is so much better. Look, it outputs HTML as well. Now, nowadays the problem, though, of course, of not having reached that silver bullet is the paradigm, right? How many of you have read this book? A couple of years ago, 5, 6, 7 years ago, I read a blog post by Jeff Atwood where he was saying that he's not read this book. You all know Coding Hard, Jeff Atwood, and I was like, you call yourself a software developer? Well, me and 600 other people. And we're like, how can you possibly read this book, not read this book, and call yourself a software developer? Of course, nowadays, have you noticed how few people put up their hands? I bet you've all read it. But nowadays, if you read this book, you're criticized. Why? Because object orientation is a thing of the past. Now it's about functional programming, right? It's all about functional programming. And it's this new, I actually heard this on Twitter from someone from the JavaScript community. Functional programming is a radical new paradigm that was only invented 80 years ago. And there's only one way to do functional programming. And this kind of depends at what conference I ask it. But if I ask it at this conference, it's going to be F#. And you know how, by the way, like they say, you know how an application is written in F#? Because they'll bloody tell you it is. Haskell. If you're not doing Haskell, you're not doing functional programming. But it has a higher order function. Nope. But I'm using primitives. Nope. Haskell. I actually came across, talking about F#, actually, I came across recently a tweet by someone that said functional programming in F# helps Jet, which is a company in the States, rivaling Amazon, raise $500 million. So I clicked on the link to TechCrunch. It didn't have anything about F#. And I'm really thinking to myself, like, did the VC come and say, what are you using? F#? Okay, here's $500 million. But of course, someone from the F# community will tweet this because, hey, go F#. F# is cool, by the way. But anyway, if you're not into F#, the future is bright. It's called JavaScript. Screw C#, screw F#, screw it all. JavaScript is productive, and it's good. And it is productive, though. And it's not productive for any other reason that apart from everything else, we have Node. So how many of you are familiar with Node? Right? Node is, imagine all of the stuff we wrote with JavaScript on the front end. Well, now you can do all that crap in the back end as well. And Node has like really picked up and it's been fantastic. And you know, at some point, someone got pissed off with Node and they forked it. And suddenly it says, an article comes out and says, future popular coding tool in doubt after it split into two. This is from Wired magazine, right? A couple of weeks later, someone tweeted, if you're stuck on technology that is legacy, such as Node.js, Really? It was just like 2 weeks ago. Doesn't matter. It's already legacy. Fortunately for us, they made up. So it's all back together again. Wired didn't even bother changing the picture. They're like, it forks, it merges. It's fine. Everything was okay. Everyone was happy. And then Microsoft says, we're forking Node. Anyway. Node, one of the things that make Node really popular is the packages. It's the ecosystem. And this is true. It's really, really fantastic. It's got this thing called NPM, which is kind of like NuGet, but it works. And NPM is the package manager for Node. And if you go to the website, it says for Node. And if you wait a few seconds, it also says Bower. And if you're wondering what Bower is, it's a package manager. And it's got really discoverable names. Things like testacular, shit, moron, happy, whatever, things.js. In fact, I'm not making this up. And there's a drinking game which says, from Shai, you might know him, think of a noun, Google it, if a library exists, drink. And you know the saying, never try and drink a Russian under the table? This is kind of the same thing, right? You will get drunk. Well, you guys might take a little longer, but you will get drunk. But it does provide us, JavaScript has provided us with excellent frameworks. How many of you use AngularJS? Right? It's awesome. And emphasis by Google. So emphasis on the by and the Google, meaning apparently something, but not meaning that it's going to be compatible with 2.0. But it's okay. Everyone got upset about that, but it's fine. I said, screw this, I'm jumping on the React bandwagon. I'm not even doing Angular. I did it, it failed, I said React.js. So I went on the React.js bandwagon, and I said, I went to the website, and I'm like, okay, this is cool. I noticed a new button appeared as soon as I hit the website, which said compatibility certificate. I clicked on it, and it said, we guarantee that this is going to be compatible with 2.0. Point being that when Google Angular 2.0 came out, and everyone was complaining it was incompatible, all of the React.js community was saying, you see, you should have stuck with React.js, because that was so much better. But it is actually so good that WordPress has rewritten their admin side in Node.js. Now, if you're not familiar with WordPress, it's one of the largest users of PHP. Now, given that they've rewritten their admin side on PHP, someone alarmed the entire world saying that this is the end of PHP as a major language. We love to react to these things. Now, given that, I don't mind, actually, if that is true, but that's another matter. React Native. React Native is an amazing new paradigm to create mobile applications using JavaScript. And I'll pause a minute there and think about it, using JavaScript. We're trying to move away from JavaScript, and they keep throwing more JavaScript down our throats. But it's a game changer, apparently. And it really is a game changer because someone on the internet said it's a game changer. If you're not familiar, how many of you have actually used React? React.js is really good. It's got this thing, it's tried to simplify things, so it's got this thing called the Flux Architecture, where instead of having MVC, you have this. Web API goes to web utils, that talks to action creators, that talks to dispatcher, that talks to store, that talks to React views, that goes to user interactions, that goes back to somewhere else. Someone realized that this was a little bit too hard, so they came up with a new architecture, which is called Reflux. Unfortunately, this is the only diagram I found of it on the internet. Nonetheless, it is a silver bullet. And the great thing about JavaScript is that if you don't like frameworks, you can wait a few days. A new one will appear. Literally, something appears, and the next minute we got a log in the U-Track saying, like, will WebStorm support .js? And this has given birth to isomorphism. How many of you know what isomorphism is? So isomorphism, let me explain it to you in a few steps. We used to do server-side rendering, and we realized that it wasn't smooth back in the web forms days. Someone said, let's do client-side code. And they said, client-side rendering is hard, so let's create a framework. Then the SEOs complained. Someone said, why don't we just create another framework? And that's isomorphism, which renders the exact same thing on the client and on the server. Brilliant. If you don't like that, you can use Vapor.js, which is an empty script file, but I think there are forks on it on GitHub. But there is hope. TypeScript language went to see Google, and everything was great, and we know the result of that. AngularJS 2 is using TypeScript, so now we've got JavaScript with types. I'm more in the favor of just no more bloody JavaScript. I'm just reluctant to some ASM that we'll never have to deal with again. But anyway, getting back to React and talking about naming things badly, we are beyond, I lied to you just recently when I said we're doing, the new paradigm is functional programming. It is not. The new paradigm is reactive, right? We're all now reactive. And don't call it functional reactive programming because that's something completely different. Do you know why we're reactive? Reactive extensions, RxJava has now RxJS. Why are we reactive? Because there's a manifesto telling us to be. Right? There's a reactive manifesto.org that says that it doesn't matter what you do, you have to be reactive and your applications need to be scalable and everything. But now it makes sense, in fact, for me to say something. I'm developing a functionally reactive RESTful microservice, and I'm writing it in Rx CoffeeScript, which is the flavor of RxJava for CoffeeScript, building it with Grunt and shipping it in Docker. Because Docker, of course, is now the thing as well. And my theory of this is that because the only way for us to guarantee working software was to say that it works on our machine, let's just ship our damn machine, right? Apparently, though, Docker is the silver bullet. Because building software is hard. It is hard. If you're old enough to remember Make, yeah? Make was great. And then there was Ant, or Nant. And then we got MS Build, JavaLand got Maven. And then someone said Ruby. Ruby appeared, which is, apparently Ruby isn't a thing anymore. Someone else said expressive. Ruby is good. Ruby is expressive. Someone said DSL. Oh, God. I'm sounding like Kotlin right now. Anyway, and someone said, oh, bother. And then they created Rake, which was a more descriptive way of describing build. And the JVM got Gradle. And .NET got Psake, Cake, Fake, which is the F# make, which is actually probably one of the best. Do you know what JavaScript got? Jake. But JavaScript also got Grunt. And someone looked at it and said, this is really ugly. Let's do Gulp. Right? So now, to build software, you have to pull down half of the internet. Because Gulp has packages for everything. You want to print out to a line. There's a package for that. You want to pipe something, there's a package for that. Do you want to copy? There's 2 packages for that. It feels like, like when you start a new NuGet project, the same kind of thing. And if building software is hard, building scalable software is much, much harder. I don't know if you've seen this one. It's the Rockstar Node.js. You should look it up on Google. But nowadays, we all need to scale. All of us. It doesn't matter whether or not we're just creating a simple application for a small shop that if they're massively successful, they'll have 50 users. No, you need scale. You need elasticity. You need scale. And there's a whole bunch of providers out there providing it to us, right? You need to scale. It doesn't matter what you build. You need scale, otherwise known as Silicon Valley Syndrome. And they've opened new doors for us, right? If you're not familiar, there's a new hot topic nowadays. It's called the Internet of Things. This is a Raspberry Pi connected to my toilet. And the idea was that I could tweet without turning around to pull the flush. So tweet to flush. I posted this on Twitter as a mock-up, and the first response was, how do you make sure the cable doesn't get wet? And if Internet of Things isn't your thing because you don't want to mess with electricity, you've got DevOps. And DevOps is apparently something that you can certify and build tools on and hire people. You can hire a DevOps person. And of course, finally, well, not finally, but there is also methodology, right? Methodology, if, we all know waterfall sucks. Yep, waterfall sucks. I know you guys, you guys hate Agile as well. This is the anti-Agile conference. But I've got good news for you because Scrum also is the new waterfall. So Scrum sucks as well. Lean, I think, still is not officially sucking But it will at some point. Check back in 3 weeks. But if you think about it, we are absolute geniuses. We are. We are learning. We are having fun. We're in a fast-paced technology scenario. It's absolutely brilliant. And on top of that, we have created a self-sustaining industry. Right? This is the typical IT life cycle. New technology comes out, we recommend it, we sell it, we provide training, normally in the form of a 2-day master program. People, our customers, they implement it, they put it in production, something goes wrong. They call us, and by that time, what do we have? A new technology, right? And we're all guilty of this. Consultants, trainers, all of us. In fact, it would be very unfair for me to say we're not, because we're there to tool it for you, right? And on top of that, now we offer it with subscriptions. If you look at the technology life cycle, it's like 10, create new framework, 20, create conference around framework, 30, go to 10. And I validated my theory recently. How many of you heard of Cycle.js? So it's an improvement to React.js. I predict 2016 is going to be the year of Cycle.js. Mark my words. Okay? Right. I'm done. I'm really done. I'm going to shut up and I'm done. I've stopped making fun of everything and everything there is, including everyone and everyone. And I'm going to stop for a second and let you think, and then ask you and myself the question of what is my point, right? There isn't one. And I told you this when you came to the session. I said, if you're here to learn something, there isn't, right? The problem is that I've got 17 minutes left, and I don't know what else to talk about. But there is actually one point, and one thing is that there is no silver bullet. Now, is there anybody that came here thinking there was? Okay, so you didn't learn anything. There is no silver bullet. So if there is no silver bullet, then I ask ourselves, like, why are we constantly jumping onto the new technologies? Why are we constantly chasing the new, amazing, most amazing thing? But to answer that question, you've got to ask yourself, like, why are we developing software? Why? I ask you, why are you developing software? It's fun. What else? It pays well. SharePoint? SAP? You got to tell me where it pays well, okay? How many of you are in it for automation? Because you love to automate stuff. How many of you are in it because you actually find that software kind of helps people do things? Right. We're in it to try and solve problems because it's a challenge, it's fun, it's great. We're not in it because of software. We're not writing software to constantly be writing software just for the fact of writing software, because we always have to have something, one problem that we're trying to solve. And definitely that problem isn't upgrades, right? We're not like robots where it's like constantly, yo, you need the new upgrade. And given the really, really, really high technology churn, it's really impossible to always be on the latest and greatest. It's just impossible. It's kind of like saying, you know what, I'm not going to buy a computer. Why? Because I know in 2 weeks it's going to be cheaper. Well, yes, but you need a computer. And normally, you know, computers get cheaper, unless, of course, it's Apple, where it gets less ports and more expensive. But you have to buy this computer and you have to do these things, right? But you say, no, that's completely wrong of you, because what we're doing is we're innovating. We're finding new ways to improve things, right? And to that I say, yes, that is great. Innovation and improvement are good. And you know, I say that completely seriously. That is why this slide is in Comic Sans, in red and in bold. And it's not me being sarcastic, it's so that you remember this and say, this idiot was writing things in Comic Sans, because that goes down well these days. But, there's always a but. What are we improving exactly? When we're doing these improvements, what are we improving? How does it bring business value? And when I talk about business value, I don't mean BDD or BDD frameworks, right? In fact, screw the whole business. How does it bring value? How do we make technology choices when we're adopting new technology? Do we use reasoning like Walmart has moved to Node.js, which they did, and they wrote loads on it. And you say, well, Walmart has moved to Node.js. Let's move to Node.js. Or are we influenced by thought leaders, speakers, industry? Oh, .NET, which is a port of Netty onto .NET, is amazing. You need to create a project with that. But do we question whether we actually have the same needs as Walmart or Google or Netflix when we make these technology choices? Or do we just say, well, Walmart moved to Node.js, we definitely should move to Node.js? Because when we ask those questions, do we wonder whether the same conditions that apply to them apply to us? Because you see, there's this word, it's called context, and it's really, really, really important. Different people in different scenarios have different needs. And technologies apply in a certain context. It's kind of like best practices. Best practices aren't best practices in every single context. So when we're making these technology choices, do we take these things into account? Or do we just do technology-driven design? This is a website, Jeff Howell tweeted, is like, I've got Java connected to talking to MongoDB, to Amazon Cloud, to React, to Ruby, to OpenStack, to Hadoop. Why? Well, it's cool. I got all of this interconnected system, and I'm monitoring it with this amazing monitoring tool that sends me reports every 2 minutes. How much is it costing you? It doesn't matter. It's really cool. But do we take into account things like the technology stability? How stable is the technology? Do we take into account, is it proven technology? Do we take into account the learning curve? Do we take into account the market share? Right? Do we really evaluate costs? When we choose a technology, we'll say, okay, it's really, really boring for me to sit down and write what I'm doing now using the same technology, maybe improve it, refactor, or I could do this awesome new thing. Let me analyze what the cost and breakdown is. No, we usually don't. And what's worse, do we validate our investments? Do we go back and say, oh, well, now that we have actually moved to Node.js, we are saving 3 hours a day, and look, I can prove it to you. Because we don't normally. Why? Because if things go bad, that's a problem, because we're not Google, we're not Facebook, right? And then the question is, does it actually impact our pay? If we make a wrong technology choice, do we get less money every month because we made the wrong technology choice? Is it coming out of our own pocket? Normally, it isn't. We're not the risk takers, so screw that. The risk takers are making the money. But we have, as developers, financial impedance mismatch, which is basically a disconnect from revenue often, right? What we're doing, does it impact revenue? That's why I say it's really important. At some point in our lives, all of us have to actually try and run a business. Because once you run the business, once you make the technology choices, you're going to take into account money, right? You're going to say, how much is this actually going to cost me? That is something that often we forget. And then you say, well, does it bring value? And if it doesn't bring value, then why should I do it? So I question then, and I say this to myself because I'm guilty of this as well, are we confusing our desire to learn with business value? Are we justifying the need for something because we just want to learn it? Is it that we're just chasing the new shiny because we just want to learn that new shiny? Or are our decisions CV-driven? Yeah, CV-driven design. Or is it social pressure? Oh, that poor person is still using Delphi. What an idiot. What a loser. Well, you know, Delphi was using the Rosetta Comet, right? This is a really, really funny one that was tweeted, and someone even wrote a blog post about this that was hilarious. JSON-SX is an IBM standard format to represent JSON as XML. You look at it, and it's hard not to laugh. Like, why would I want to represent JSON as XML? Why? Maybe there's a reason. Maybe that reason is because it was simpler to do this hack than to rewrite an entire system. And you say, no, it's not CV-driven design. It's not a desire to learn myself. It's to attract new talent. Because I can't attract someone, say, oh, we're doing Delphi. Yes, why? Because this is how we do our CVs. AngularJS, Durandal. Well, Durandal is already gone. It's Aurelia now. React, jQuery, JavaScript, Java, Clojure. I know all of these things. Yeah? Oh, you don't even need to see my CV. Just point to GitHub. Well, I don't do open source. Yeah, you call yourself a developer? How dare you? Sorry, I'm 24/7 adding value to something that I can't open source for whatever reason. You're not a developer. You're not passionate if you don't have an open source GitHub repo. And this is how we write CVs. Instead of saying, oh, you know what? I got a brain. I know software engineering. I can learn things. Right? And here's my experience. I've provided value in this aspect. I've helped solve this problem. We don't focus on this. It's a vicious circle that we're driving ourselves. And I ask you, how many of you want to be based on your valued on your technology stack? You know C#? Great, you're an awesome person. You know F#? You're double awesome. You know Java? Go away. No. People don't want to be valued on that because you all learned C#, you all learned Java, you all learned F#. And guess what? Technologies come and go. And what you invested in learning today, especially in the JavaScript world, tomorrow is not going to be around. And you say, but we need to be on the cutting edge. Yes, we do. We do. We need to learn. Yes, we do. We have to learn. It is our job to learn. It is part of the job, whether someone else is paying the bills or not. If they are, awesome. If they're not, tough. Pay your own bills and learn. That's why we got into this profession, to constantly challenge ourselves. But we need to evaluate when we make decisions, and we need to evaluate taking things into account, not just our own selfishness. And we question when to adopt things. We don't adopt things based on hype-driven development. You know, as a friend of mine on Twitter says, you know, choosing technology based on GitHub forks and stars. Oh, look at this framework. It's got 260 stars. I should definitely use this somewhere. Or adoption based on technology radars. Make your own radar. Or do you feel that you have to blindly follow other people's radars? Or, as I said, thought leaders. You know, we're using this, and you know, every thought leader, everyone, everywhere, anyone, everyone is biased. Everyone has their own interests. Everyone, even me, we all do. And we got to just not follow things blindly. And the worst one is like adoption based on assumed correlation. Well, Netflix adopted microservices. Netflix is successful. Consequently, we should adopt microservices and we will be successful. And we go back to, does Netflix have the same needs as you do? Do you have the same user base? Do you have the same requirements that Netflix does? Yeah, they stream things that make us sit on the sofa for hours and days and hours. And by the way, Narcos is a really good series. You should watch it. You should, in fact, binge watch it. But if you think about it, you know, we have so much potential. Really, I mean, think of a profession that is as great as ours, that we can continuously challenge our brains learning new things. But let's not waste it on hype. Let's focus on the right things, right? Let's evaluate, let's learn, let's progress. But when we do it, don't discard absolutely everything else and just not do it out of selfish interest. Now you've learned a whole lot. Go learn more and apply blindly absolutely everything that you have learned. Thank you.